A triumphant North Korea says its latest ballistic missile test demonstrates that it now has the capability to strike anywhere in the United States. An announcement on state television said Pyongyang had achieved its mission of becoming a nuclear state. Well, the missile took off from Pyeongchang, north of the capital, although it travelled for less than an hour, falling into the Sea of Japan after 1,000 kilometres. Experts say the height it achieved indicates that a flatter trajectory could bring Washington within range of an attack. This was President Trump's response to the test.
As you probably have heard, and some of you have reported, a missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it. We have General Mattis in the room with us, and we've had a long discussion on it. It is a situation that we will handle.
Of course, there's a very different view in North Korea. These comments were recorded on the streets of Pyongyang by the AFP news agency.
With the respected Supreme Commander, Comrade Kim Jong-un, our country could develop into the world's strongest nuclear power. I think the world cannot exist without our country.
I just want to ask a question to Trump, a dotard who is frequently backbiting our dignity. Can you still dare to backbite about our country? Can you continue to do it even when Hwasong 15 is fired at the US mainland?
Well, let's go to Beijing now, the region's big power, to talk to our correspondent, Stephen McDonnell. Steve, what reaction from there?
Well, the Chinese government has said it has grave concerns following this most recent ballistic missile test from North Korea and called on North Korea, its old ally, its old strong Cold War ally, to stop taking these actions which are destabilising the region. Now, these, are kind of standard responses from China, but we shouldn't, for a moment, think that this is not a very stern response from Beijing, which has also said that North Korea is fully aware, not only of China's own concerns, but its responsibilities as spelt out through the United Nations Security Council. And it did add, though, we went along to the Foreign Ministry press briefing, and via that that person's words, we know the Chinese government position. They've said that other countries should be doing more to bring everybody to the negotiating table. Now, again, China keeps saying this, and it's unclear how that could possibly happen. China wants a freeze in US and South Korean exercises in exchange for North Korea stopping its missile testing, but in the West and in everywhere else except for China, I guess apart from Russia, there's not much enthusiasm for that way forward.
And Stephen, just remind us how much China is doing, in fact, pressurised by Donald Trump too, on the economic side. Well,
you can imagine China would argue, the Chinese government, we're the ones taking most of the economic heat on this because 80+% of North Korea's trade is coming through China. Now, textiles blocked, coal has massive restrictions and at the moment is blocked, seafood blocked. So all these ways that North Korea used to get hard currency are not available anymore through China. Now, what the Chinese government says, I think there's a lot of confusion over this when you hear statements from the US administration in terms of China could do more, or it's not going to do anything outside what the United Nations Security Council says. Now, the Chinese government says we are very strongly adhering to what we've agreed to at the UN Security Council. So for China to do any more, for example, some countries have called on China to cut off gas altogether. It's not going to do that unless that is agreed to at the UN Security Council.
Steve, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on the reaction from China. We also have a line coming through, reported by AFP from the Kremlin, saying this is a provocative action, this latest missile test, that will lead to further tensions. Joining me now, our defence correspondent, Jonathan Marcus. Jonathan, how much of a step forward is this for North Korea?
Well, it's steady progress. I think two interesting things about this launch. Well, three really. One, that it happened at all. So the slight lull for 2 months in North Korean testing clearly wasn't because they were cowed by the United States or pressurized by China. They were simply having a kind of seasonal slowdown, which analysts have pointed to in past years. The second thing, the height the missile reached, which if you think about it, these are missiles that go out of the atmosphere and come down again. Now on a shallower trajectory, as you mentioned, this missile potentially could reach the continental United States, even Washington, analysts say. But what the North Koreans actually do is they tend to fire them very, very high up and they come down again. And it's an assessment of that altitude that gives experts an ability to plot how far it could reach. Thirdly, an interesting sidelight, if you like, they fired it at night. That they've done this before, but it's interesting because it means that the missile isn't perhaps so easily visible. There are suggestions that they may have fueled it before the missile was actually launched into an erect position prior to the launch. And again, all sorts of indications that they're trying to get to a point where they would have weapons that could be fired in much shorter times, visible to a potential preemptive striker, for example, for a much shorter period.
So that has got to cause, at the least, real concern in Washington.
Well, it causes real concern. I mean, look, Mr. Trump has made it clear. He says that North Korea will not be allowed to have a weapon that could carry a nuclear bomb to the continental United States. Is North Korea at that point now? Probably not. There are a whole set of complicated technical and physical things that are required to actually, launching the missile is one thing, getting the range is another, but being able to have a warhead on the front, which is heavier, to make sure that that warhead gets through the atmosphere and so on intact is another thing. So it probably still has many more stages to go through. But of course, the crucial thing is that experts have been amazed by the progress that North Korea has been making. They have not been going along, as it were, to the slow, gradual timeline that many people expected. They have been exceeding that. And that is what is worrying many people.
Yeah, they have done far better in their terms than expected, and that's something that the White House and the Pentagon will be very aware of, which throws the light back on President Trump's threats to rain down fire, the possibility of a military option.
Well, it seems almost cavalier to talk about it. I mean, what would a military option involve? Would it involve taking out a single weapon a single missile before it was being fired? Would it be a preemptive strike to try and take out as much of North Korea's nuclear and missile architecture and so on as the Americans can reach? What would be the consequences of that, particularly for America's close ally, South Korea? It's almost unthinkable. The problem is that the diplomatic process is getting nowhere. Once again, we're hearing calls from the Americans to turn the screw that extra little bit tighter. We know that the Chinese are very unwilling to do that, for the fundamental reason that they do not want the North Korean regime to disappear. They do not want to see a united Korea, probably in a Western, in a US orbit, right up against their border. So they're prepared to put up with an awful lot. That doesn't mean they like what the North Koreans are doing. It doesn't mean they're happy with these constant tests and nuclear developments. But today's UN Security Council meeting is going to be interesting, fundamentally to see what the Russians say, but fundamentally to see what the Chinese say, and are they willing, as the Americans would have it, to turn the screw that little extra bit tighter.
Jonathan Marcus, thank you very much.